Hi, everyone, and welcome to this next episode of ERM's Sustainable Connections podcast. It's actually our first one of 2024. Really excited to look back and think a little bit of some of the implications of 2023, but especially to look forward on where the nature and biodiversity agendas are going to go in the 12 months ahead. Today, I'm with Emily McKenzie, who is the Technical Director at the Taskforce on Nature-Related Disclosures, or TNFD, and also joined by Matt Haddon, who is an ERM partner like me, the global lead for nature and water for our organization. So Emily and Matt, I'm not going to read bios. I'd love to get your voices on here right away and feel like the best way to do that is to let you more properly introduce yourself. Would love to hear a little bit about your roles in each of your organizations. What makes your work satisfying and why do you pursue this work? Emily, I'm going to give the floor over to you first. Welcome, and please tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Mark, and it's a pleasure to be speaking with you and Matt here today. My role as the technical director involves overseeing that technical aspect of all things TNFD has been doing. I've been there for 2 years, and our focus has been on developing a set of recommendations for disclosure and guidance. So I've been guiding all that technical work. But a really important part of it's also been establishing strong partnerships with leading science organizations and standards bodies to ensure what we're doing is based on our important principles, which is being science-based, but then also learning by doing. We had 200 pilots as we developed the framework. So learning to make sure it meets another principle of TNFDs, which is being practical to apply. And what makes it satisfying to me, I love learning by doing. So what we're doing is very practical, supporting decisions based on evidence and science, but also scaling that through standardization and seeing that as a really powerful way to shift finance away from activities that are harming nature and causing risks and towards those that are helping it thrive. And then just personally, my role before joining TNFD, I was working in UK government, the Treasury, working on an independent review called the Dasgupta Review on the economics of biodiversity, which was all about how to ensure our engagements with nature were sustainable and not jeopardizing the wealth and well-being of both current and future generations and creating risks for our financial economic systems. And this was one of the very specific recommendations, came out 3 years ago, roughly. So it was really inspiring then to be able to put one of its recommendations into practice, and it's proved intellectually very fascinating. How we cover all sorts of topics, scenarios, measurement, risk assessment, engagement with stakeholders, target setting. So it's been like a jigsaw puzzle, putting all those pieces together to create something for impact, which has been very satisfying.
I love it. Great intro. And I'm always interested when people are moving sector to sector within the economy, pursuing some of the same topics, and also that blend of governmental policy and implementation that you can bring to an organization like TNFD. We'll get farther into TNFD as we go, but Matt, first want to give you the floor for a moment as well. Explain that global lead for nature and water and why you're doing what you're doing at ERM.
My actual full title is Global Lead Nature and Water Voyager. And that word Voyager is kind of an ERM thing, but kind of important too. And it's kind of the context for my job, because I'm helping ERM and our clients figure out what to do with this new thing, which, of course, as we all know, as scientists and environmental scientists, it isn't really a new thing, but the new era of finance, business, and nature. So that awakening of the capital markets, the awakening of the executive suite, the awakening of policymakers is really what we're voyaging into. So I'm helping our clients and our colleagues get their heads around, well, what does that mean in practice? What do we actually do? How do we blend together science data with finance data with an understanding of impact on business and then, more importantly, action? And I've spent the last 4 or 5 years working on carbon, and then I got the opportunity to shift into what I think is the next big wave of societal need, which is those critical challenges we're starting to face around biodiversity, ecosystem services, water scarcity, all those sorts of things.
Yeah, I was so pleased when we put the Voyager label to work inside ERM. I like the connotation that we're sort of pioneering on the edge of new issues that are starting to scale up. I like the image of the Voyager satellite pushing out into new frontiers as well. And essentially, that's what we've asked you to do. Emily, I want to come back to TNFD. And I guess as sustainability expert as our audience is, maybe not everybody will know exactly what TNFD is, so we should give that a word and talk about the formal launch of TNFD last September back at Climate Week in New York City, and maybe what it means to have hit that milestone. So give us the basic on what is TNFD and where is it exactly today?
So TNFD is a market-led, government-supported by the G7 and G20 and science-based initiative. At the centre sits a private sector task force group of global financial institutions and companies across a variety of sectors, as well as market intermediaries. And our first mission was to develop and deliver a risk and opportunity management framework and a disclosure framework. And we built by design from what listeners may be more familiar with, the TCFD, another acronym, which we also borrowed, inspired by our sister organization. And so in a nutshell, what we produced and we launched in September last year is a set of recommended disclosures that build from TCFDs for climate risks and broaden them to cover nature in its entirety. And with that is a package of accompanying additional guidance. In many instances, we've gone further than TCFD did because nature is a new topic. It's based on feedback from the market. It's a new topic, seen as complex. So we've also created an assessment methodology and a package of guidance on how to understand the topic to create that consistency and understanding. So that's what we do in a nutshell. Happy to dive into any of the specifics. It was a really fantastic launch in New York Climate Week in September. We held it in the stock exchange, and it was really interesting to see people who were there who were new to the topic and those who've been there for some time, all, I think, really struck by the symbolism of having the sounds and the pictures and the discussion of nature in the stock exchange, including on the training floor. And I think, it sort of put shivers down our spines that this is a big milestone. But then even since then, we've had a more recent milestone at Davos where we announced a group of 320 early adopters. So these is a group that are committed to start making nature-related disclosures based on those recommendations. And happy to dig into that grouping and the breakdown. But I think it's been fantastic to move just 4 months after the launch of the recommendations to see such a big group and diverse group of the market moving ahead, only a little over a year after the Global Biodiversity Framework was agreed by nearly 200 governments back in Montreal in the previous December. So sense of momentum. There's no point developing a framework if it's not used, right? So we're shifting really quickly now to adoption and humble that we still have so much to learn, even though we thought very carefully and deeply about supporting with all the guidance. I think it will be a continuous learning journey now.
Yeah, no, I think that there's got to be a relationship between early adopters and voyagers, and we'll want to learn more about what those early adopters are doing. Matt, I'm just curious, I know you were in Montreal at Climate Week. You've been watching this journey and watching TNFD unfold. What do you think it means for companies to have TNFD? What do our clients say about the emergence of this guideline?
But before I try and answer that, Mark, I just wanted to say I loved what you guys did, Emily, about you introduced a third animal to Wall Street. We're used to Wall Street being bears and bulls, and you guys had bees buzzing all over the place in terms of the presentations. And I thought that was brilliant because that comes to a very, very physical and practical and relatable question that people are now properly worrying about as companies. How do we rely on pollinators in the world? What does that mean for the value chain and the supply chains that we take products from, and that if we don't steward appropriately, we won't get those products anymore? And maybe that's the bridge to an answer to your question, actually, Mark. I think we're seeing a very rapid awakening of the financial sector and of the executive class to actual business risk and opportunity. I think many organizations haven't really understood how their businesses are dependent on the natural world. And I think there's a rapid increase in awareness of the practicality of that. And the thing I think that comes back to the financial sector piece is the potential for stranded assets and the potential for winners and losers. And so we're seeing the same process, the same theory of change play out on nature as we saw on carbon. And I think that's the ripple that we're seeing come down through our clients very clearly.
And is there an example, Matt, of that risk crystallizing for a sector or maybe even for an individual organization that stands out for you?
The water one is a very live one for me at the moment. There's a number of our clients, different sectors, tech, energy, mining, getting very, very aware of their reliance on water and an ecosystem services, to use the geek speak, that they've taken for granted. And so we're working with clients who are driven by their boards and their executives who said, we've taken all this for granted. We're starting to get into trouble. I mean, one of the most fascinating ones for me is the emergence of the wind to hydrogen market, where people are realizing that actually water is a central piece of the producing green hydrogen process. But you can't just stick a windmill somewhere where it's windy and then take water out of an aquifer and produce hydrogen because, oh, there is increasing scarcity of water and there's lots of other people and ecosystems that need it. And so it's creating a whole new series of thought processes.
Yeah, I hear as well. Many folks sort of seeing water as their entry in terms of understanding and application in the nature space. Emily, we've already flashed back to Climate Week in a couple of ways. I agree with Matt that with the bees at the stock exchange and everything else, it felt somewhat like a nature takeover of Climate Week. And some folks might be wondering why, and they might be wondering it even more because I'm going to move from Climate Week to COP28 and the climate meeting that just took place in Dubai at the end of last year. But this is, of course, because nature and climate are intrinsically linked, right? And I think if 2023 brought us anything, it was a wider realization of how deeply intertwined these agendas are. So I'd love to ask you about Dubai, but I don't care in this instance about the climate related outcomes in their own right. I'd love to know what you thought were the most important nature related outcomes from COP28.
Thanks. And actually, it's a beautiful segue back to what Matt was just discussing, because one of the many pieces that we launched at COP28 was a collaboration. It was led by Bloomberg, but we collaborated with them on it with 10 case studies that specifically look at how nature-related risks are translating into financial risks for the organization. So there are 10 case studies, and it's really interesting that they found that all sectors that they examined were exposed to nature-related risks, which then comes through to the pattern of what we're seeing in our early adopters. 58 of the 77 SASB sectors are covered in the early adopters group. So there's really no clear pattern. You see it across materials, transport, energy, industrials, not just what is often associated with nature traditionally, as agriculture, for example. Mm-hmm. So we're seeing that real diversity. And so that's a bridge then to your question. Yeah, personally, COP28 was a fantastic opportunity for me to be there. It was very timely for us because nature, the bees were still flying maybe from the long journey from New York to Dubai. And we wanted to continue to raise awareness of our recommendations. There were some specific questions coming to us about adoption, so able to have those bilaterals, and then working with our partners to get thoughts on what we should do in our next phase, shift our strategy from developing and delivering the framework to then encouraging and enabling adoption. And so it was in that context of my own personal bilaterals and discussions, I was delighted to see that it felt like the Climate Nature Food COP in many ways. There were many sessions on nature and there were many on food systems and that nexus between nature, water, which Matt emphasized, climate and food. We've been talking about that nexus for years, but it was great to see it so prominent at the COP. And that's exactly how it should be. As we know, climate change is just one of the 9 planetary boundaries, just one of 6 that we've moved beyond the safe space for, and one of the 5 recognized drivers of nature change. And there are all these interconnections between climate and nature that are fundamental. So there were specific announcements, beyond us, the joint statement on climate, nature and people from the UNFCCC and COP28 and CPD presidencies. There's a lot of acronyms there, but basically bringing the climate, biodiversity worlds together, setting out the importance of collaboration, having stronger synergies between climate and nature, scaling these financial flows and investments for climate and nature, seeing this as an integrated agenda. So I was really heartened by that.
Yep, that coming together of agendas and almost collisions sometimes, but then finding where the edges meet, maybe the ability to put the pieces of the puzzle that you referred to together in the right way going forward. Matt, is there a COP28 highlight that stood out for you in terms of its impact or emphasis on the nature agenda?
The ongoing connection of the relationship between finance and the environment and science and society, I think, is the bit that's just getting more and more intertwined. And my kids are at the prime anxiety, climate anxiety age, late teens, early 20s. And we have this ongoing dinner conversation about, are we just all going to hell? Or is there some possibility of hope? And I'm not sure they entirely believe me yet, but I am increasingly convinced that one of the major pathways to addressing a number of these critical issues for us is the unlocking of what I tell them are the filthy capitalists. Because regardless of whether you think you can change society and get rid of capitalism, entirely different conversation. But the awakening of people who care about their money, either losing less of it or making more of it, is what's really the age that we're in, to my mind. And the strong thing I saw out of COP28, I saw it out of the Biodiversity COP in Montreal, where I remember, Emily, how you were having to reorganize the building to get everybody into the TNFD
We
sessions.
had to take down a wall to fit everyone in. It was an amazing moment.
So an indication of, and they weren't all NGOs, they were businesses who are going, okay, right, I got to get my head around this because we think this means something to us, both for practical reasons for our own business, but also because the people that have our capital are asking us different questions. And I think that's a major piece of unlocking.
Yeah, at risk of making the rest of the podcast about our kids and how we explain this to them, my wife and I both work in the sustainability field, and we inevitably have these climate nature conversations with our kids, all teens as well. It was really heartening to end 2023 feeling like there had been a shift in a way that I hadn't felt I could communicate to that particular audience for some time. So let's hope we can keep on doing that.
Our biggest deliverable at COP28 was our draft sector guidance, which is out for consultation by the end of March. Encourage all listeners to send us your feedback, and for 8 sectors. And what was great, I think my children have looked a bit bemused about what I was doing. Maybe I'm not conveying it as clearly and compellingly as Matt, but they're also only just entering teenageness. But what really brought it to life was the sector guidance. As I was finalizing the drafts and they were looking over my shoulder, they said, what are you doing? And I listed the sectors, metals and mining, forestry and paper, agriculture. And they looked around the room, and every sector I could point to something in the room that we have bought that relates to our impact and dependencies on the environment. And you could see the cogs turning. So one of my takeaways has been the importance of that sector guidance, which is still in development, but it really where the realities, the specifics, the real examples Matt was starting to give come to life.
And we're seeing a lot of our clients, because we work in all the sectors of the economy and all the sectors that you guys have been focusing on. And they're all saying, okay, now this is becoming clearer to us because we start to get a more specific framework that we can grapple with.
I think one of the opportunities for the nature agenda to really accelerate too is people's ability to see the dependency. They don't understand it until they do. And then it's often local. It's their own watershed. It's their own forest. It's a bit less esoteric than some of the things we grapple with across this field at times. Emily, you've mentioned already the early adopters, and moving into 2024 at Davos, the early adopter campaign was announced. So explain a little bit more, who are the early adopters and what is the campaign setting out to accomplish?
Really, Davos was the end of our campaign because that was the announcement of who we brought on. We started the campaign as soon as we left in September. So that's why it's been a 4-month campaign, and really wanted to keep the momentum and show that this is real, there's real appetite, and it will shift now to our community of practice, bringing them together to learn from each other. Although I would say that we are still going to have a system whereby organizations can register as adopters. I'm afraid we won't call you early. but we won't call you tardy. We'll just call you adopters. We hope to do another announcement. We'll register, we'll do that on a rolling basis and then do another announcement at COP16 in Colombia. But this first group, as I mentioned, there are 320 organizations. They're headquartered in 46 countries. It includes 100 financial institutions, notably Norges Bank Investment Management, the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund, who own almost 1.5% of all shares in the world's listed companies, but also 7 of the 29 globally systemically important banks. And as I mentioned, there are a range of types of organizations. A little over half are companies, a third are financial institutions. We have some market service providers and a few others, notably, universities and NGOs. And then the regional breakdown, we have seen stronger uptake in Europe, which was to be expected given the CSRD, the European regulations, but also really strong uptake, which mirrors what we saw with the pilot testing in our development phase in Asia and the Pacific, notably Japan, also Australia. And then it's weaker, and we need to build further awareness in North America, Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. So that's the sort of regional representation. As I said, the sector representation is all over the place, which is exciting and shows, I think we've broken out of that previous mentality that's only a few sectors this was relevant to.
Perfect. And Matt, you're a Voyager. We're talking about early adopters. We also worked with companies who were piloting the TNFD pre its September formal launch. All those words are code for we'd like you to do something no one else has done before. It'll be hard, and we can't give you a full roadmap. So what have you seen of the experience of the pilots and the kind of early adopter companies you've been working alongside?
The early adopters, so the pilot companies, they learned that starting early wasn't a bad thing. Now, some organizations are sort of culturally built around wait till it's all been sorted and then we'll jump in. But a surprising number of companies that actually are a bit more conservative also have had a go. And I think that the way that the TNFD allowed it to be an experimental process helped a lot of that. So the hammer doesn't fall for a year or two yet, and so the space for people to get into it, see what it feels like, see what they can learn. So lots of different patterns. So maybe that's the first thing. People have found their own way, which is good. We are seeing a number of those clients that we started with early are now moving on to phase 2 and 3 and 4 of that journey. So the learning cycle is going really quite quickly. And those organizations have moved from what the heck is this to, okay, so let's understand our baseline. Let's understand how this might affect us. Let's take something to our executive team. There's been a very interesting number of board briefings, executive trainings that's going on, which you didn't see with climate for quite a few years, with carbon, should I say, for a number of years. So that's gone much quicker. And then out of that has been then a rapid acceleration of how those companies lean in. And so we're seeing it go much quicker. We're seeing people step through it in the space that TNFD has created. And we're also seeing a rapid shift towards data. The realization that you need data to make this work. You need data to be available for some very different use cases. I mean, we've been working on environment data for years. Mm-hmm. But it's all been, as many other people have done, it's all been about getting an impact assessment done, get a permit, whatever. We're now moving into the finance user cases, investors, executives, operations people. And so what we're now starting to see is client organizations say, I've got to get ready for that. I've got to build something. So we were talking about Davos earlier. We soft launch a new alliance that we put together with us, Salesforce, because of what they bring in terms of system-wide data capability, Planet Labs for their amazing satellite imagery and everything that comes from that, and then an organization called Nature Metrics, which is one of the pioneers in eDNA, so on the ground biodiversity assessment. So we're starting to see our clients really respond to the data question and want to get ahead of it.
Mm-hmm. And Emily, I want to stick with the data aspect where Matt has led us here. We've been using the acronym, but of course, to remind folks listening, TNFD is the Task Force on Nature-related Disclosures. High quality, investor grade, et cetera, disclosures depend on good data. And nature is comprised of so many and such diverse things that we're definitely hearing from companies. They struggle to know exactly where to start and how to organize all the data that is required to address this agenda. So what does TNFD tell companies about where to start?
I'll answer your question, then maybe take it also about where we think we need to get to so we have a better answer to that question. And I was delighted to be able to sit with the team from ERM and Planet, Salesforce and Nature Metrics in Davos last week for the launch of the Nature Tech Alliance, and see it as one really exciting coalition among the data landscape. And we're going to need that innovation, and in particular excited about groups coming together that bring complementary expertise and experience, because we don't have all of the solutions. But if we can combine expertise in AI, the deep application expertise of ERM, the work on environmental DNA and bioacoustics from Nature Metrics, and then Salesforce's sort of savviness on how it all comes together with remote sensing, it's just like I feel like people are bringing all the ingredients for the most wonderful cake, and I can't wait to eat it. And I think the market will be, raring to go. And I was always worried it was a bit of scope creep, but we have very early on established work on data right from the outset. So we convened a group of data providers. We called it the data catalyst. And the idea was exactly to catalyze further innovation by convening data providers of all types and sizes and bring real or hypothetical examples from financial institutions or corporates who were getting stuck in pilot testing and say, well, should they get stuck? Have you already got a solution? If you haven't, could you come up with one? And that catalyzes great innovation. And so we'll keep doing that. And in the meantime, we have a tools catalog online, so organizations can go to the TNFD website, organized around this assessment methodology I alluded to but didn't name. It's called the LEAP approach, and be able to see which tools for which part of the assessment are relevant. It's tagged by sector, by type of ecosystem, and they can use that to find the tools that will be relevant. And we do that all throughout our guidance. So that's what we do right now. But we know it's not good enough. And we are, again, humble and cognizant that for many organizations, there are complexities at looking across your value chain, upstream and downstream, complexities around spatial data and asset level data, complexities for looking across vast portfolios. I mentioned Norges Bank Investment Management with 9,000 companies. So to do these analyses requires new sources and access of data. In many ways, there's a wealth of data. What we found when we did our landscape assessment of data is there's plenty of data out there. It's the access, the consistency, and the innovation for analytics. We did a rapid scoping study last summer, and we're continuing to consult on that because we think there is a need for greater access and consistency, in particular for data on what we call the state of nature, where there are gaps and there is not yet consensus on what the metrics should be. So we're going to continue to explore that. It's not something TNFD itself can solve, but we think by convening and shining a light on this need, we can, again, catalyze something good on the data space over time.
Yep. And Matt, our listeners just hear us. They don't see us, but I've been watching you nod incredibly vigorously as Emily traipsed, especially the consistency of data part of that story. What was going through your mind?
Yeah, well, I think the consistency question is the killer need, because for the financial markets and executives to make decisions, they need to be able to have a view across investment options, across portfolios, across executive decisions that they might take. The challenge around nature and water data is the location specificity of it all. Doesn't matter where you throw it up in the world or where you reduce it, you can trade it between yourselves. It's all the same stuff. We have this lovely thing called the GHG protocol that has a nice little rule book. Bang, you can start to account for it. So we're seeing that play through. Nature and water, much more location specific. You can't as easily balance water consumption in a very wet place with water consumption in a very dry place. You have to understand the local conditions. And I think the role of the smart sorts of data that Emily is talking about, the use of AI, the use of satellite data, the knitting together of all the different data sources, now gives us an opportunity to manage that in a way that's meaningful to the executive decision maker, to the financial decision maker. Because in the past, it was all about local, solve it there and only solve it there. And you couldn't knit it together. Now, we still have to solve it down at the local level because that's where it matters. But also we can start to have something that connects and people can make the big decisions that ultimately will unlock finance.
Yeah. And Matt, I 100% agree with what you just sketched. I think that there's a story there in comparing nature to carbon, that nature data demands a different degree of nuance. It's got a greater degree of complexity. Those things generally lead to cost. And so I'm wondering, as you look at this field and its early development, there's a kind of who pays question. Nature related issues are often commons issues. So we all benefit from a water source, who protects it, et cetera. Are companies getting the access to nature related finance they need to do the work?
I think they are, Mark. And I think it's because they're waking up to the actual risk they have, the actual business impact of what they're facing. So I was talking to a colleague just last week. I'll talk one about water and one about nature, biodiversity. The water one was in South Africa. What's happening in South Africa is that there's all this well-publicized challenges around water supply in Cape Town and across other parts of South Africa. Businesses have said, we can't rely on the municipalities to resolve this water supply question. We need to do it for ourselves. So they're creating new models of investment and financing and management of water resources in conjunction with the other people that use these water resources to provide their own water security. In the past, in other parts of the world, organizations would say, oh, I will just go to the local town and I will say, give me this water. And somebody will say, sure, here's your permit. We're seeing, not just in Cape Town, but all over the world, clients realizing we can't accept that. We have to take this on for ourselves. So to the question of who pays, we will, because it's central to the resilience of our business. We're seeing the same thing in the biodiversity space, because organizations are waking up to there's a real business resilience need and a challenge. And therefore, it's not a separate regulatory burden that somebody should pay. And it shouldn't be me who's come up with this stuff. It's literally, now I start to realize that the resilience of my business and therefore the ability of our business model to produce cash flow and dollars and investor returns is dependent on it. So it becomes absorbed.
Yeah. And when businesses can see that direct threat to their own resilience, they tend to act. I suspect there's a long conversation we could have in there about how we avoid having the most deep-pocketed businesses buy up the water or other nature-related access that communities also need. So there's a whole equity agenda here, which we haven't spent as much time on today. I'll maybe just flag it to say we're not overlooking it and understand its complexity, because I think we actually need to kind of bring our conversation together here. And what I want to do is think ahead to what's going to happen perhaps by the end of the year when we arrive in Cartagena in Colombia. So COP15 Montreal brought us a new framework and a kind of remarkable biodiversity agreement among governments. This is the first nature-related COP since. Emily, as you look forward, what's your hope or prediction for COP16 and the next steps?
We hope and expect there'll be tremendous positive energy on the target that specifically relates to disclosure and assessment and management of nature, and in the context of this biodiversity related risks, dependencies and impacts. Elizabeth Marema, who led the Global Biodiversity Framework, so she can say this, she calls target 15 the TNFD target. So we hope that by having produced the framework and have got a strong group of adopters which will only grow in strength by there'll be a sense from governments that they can now lean in to take the recommendations and experience. And although we're a voluntary market-led initiative, that will continue the discussion about government's role in enabling and encouraging the private sector to take action. And I hope we will have set up a fantastic capacity building program with our partners. And then on data, I hope we will have the Nature Tech Alliance and many others coming up with really exciting solutions to the realities that this remains gritty analytical work. And so the speed and scale of uptake will continue on an exponential pace.
I like the gritty reminder as we think about how the capacity building needs to advance and the data quality improvements that we need. Great way to sum it up. And Matt, as you think ahead these next months, what should we watch?
I think we should watch for the 320 early adopters to see how they tackle things. I think we'll be nudging towards 500 of the not tardy, but just in time adopters. I think the number will continue just to snowball. I'm looking for and hoping for the Mark Carney moment we had with TCFD, which is when the governor of the Bank of England said, you know what, we're going to build this climate disclosure thing into financial regulation. I'm looking and waiting for that to happen somewhere in the world around nature, and I can see that pattern emerging. So I think that'll be that's a watch out moment. And thinking of the walls having to be arranged in Montreal so that we could get more people in the room for the TNFD sessions, I think we'll start to have C-suite people trampling all over each other to be on the right platforms in Cartagena, because I think the awakening of how important this is to business is going to continue to build. So I think there'll be some real leaders of the corporate world will recognize that it's time to pivot towards the nature and water agenda and want to have some visibility of it.
Terrific. Well, thank you both so much for the insights and for the closing kind of predictions, the things we can anticipate in the year ahead. I hope those things and other aspects of the nature agenda will surge forward. I don't just think that they deserve to, I think they need to for all of us. So thanks, Matt. Thanks, Emily. Best to you. I hope 2024 on a personal level is full and satisfying as much as it is in your professional work on nature.